All right, welcome to chapter 2. We're wrapping up an incredible chapter, I think, one of my favorite chapters in the book. And as you've listened to the videos and the talks and you've worked through the different content in this chapter, it's probably pretty evident to you by now. I love thinking. And I love thinking about thinking. As you've been reading the chapter, I really stress a lot about that. So again, if you're reading, watching, both, wherever you're going, grabbing this content, taking it in, if you're wondering, okay, this is all about thoughts, Yetta, and we went through a lot of different components. You'll remember we talked about the 4 components of being human, the basic human needs, cognitive distortions, how do we get unstuck, the ladder of inference. Where do you go with all of that? What do you do with that now? Now, I've talked a little bit in some of the videos about how this applies to the general public and the world at large, especially in areas of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I've done a lot of work when I did my inner MBA certification and then created this unique kind of spin-off of how I would actually combine what I learned and what I got certified in my inner MBA. I added some of my own knowledge and expertise in other areas. But what I want you to know about this is we don't teach about the thinking process. You've probably heard me say that on some of those videos. We aren't waking up to figure out, what am I thinking? Why am I even thinking what I'm thinking? And when it comes to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, which is a really important topic in the workplace, in the world, but we're talking about how to take this back into the workplace. It's important for you all to understand those 4 components of being human that we talked about in this chapter, they are unique to every human being on the planet. So that means everyone in your workplace is operating with their own 4 components of being human. Nobody is coming to the table, to the conference room, to the lunchroom, to the boardroom, to any type of space that you work with the same 4 components of being human as you. And I believe if we can start teaching leaders to understand how to identify what their 4 components of being human are, that's going to begin to open up more awareness and expand out into some empathy, but even further into compassion to help people understand in the workplace, you are not all going to think, feel, look, and behave the same. So the work isn't for us to get everybody to hold the same belief in the workplace. Your work and this inner MBA course is here to help you understand how do you learn information and then show up in a new way that holds space for multiple belief systems at the same time. Now, when we get further into mindfulness, I'll talk about how mindfulness cultivates that, but we're still in the chapter on thoughts. So you're waking up to understanding your thought process is different than anyone else's in your workplace. So I want you to think about that for a minute. The next time you're in a meeting or in a conversation, somebody else that you're talking to has a very, very different component makeup of being human than you do. We walk in and assume, well, because you live in the same place that I do, or have some of the same backgrounds, or some of the same interests, or wear the same clothes, we must be the same. That's not the case. So you're going to use the content in this chapter to gain better insight and clarity on who you are as a human being. We're actually human beings, not human doings. And you're now going to be able to lead from a place that has some awareness that says, everybody that's coming in here is going to bring their own unique value, their own perspective, their own wisdom. We assume because it's not the same as ours, it's not wisdom. And our ego jumps in and we push it back and we protect and we cut it out. And we're like, no, you don't think the way I do and you don't do what I do, so you don't have the same value as me. That's actually not true. So in the workplace, I want you to really do the work to figure out your 4 components of being human. And then as you do that, I then want you to ask yourself as a leader or a team member or coworker, what are those 5 basic human needs? Are all of yours being met? And also as a leader, are your team members' basic needs being met? Remember, this is all about psychological safety. You're learning how to create a psychologically safe space inside of you as a leader and as a coworker and team member so you can take that out into the workplace and offer the same for others. But you can't do that if you don't have the awareness that we're all unique, which ironically makes us all the same, and that we all have basic human needs. And if needs aren't being met, that's why people react and lash out in the workplace. Somewhere underneath of that behavior is a core need that's not being met. So are we offering those in the workplace? And the psychological safety you're going to create with this chapter is going to help keep this part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, engaged and online. And you'll hear me talk about that throughout the whole course. When this goes offline, everything changes. People drop their IQ by 50%. They start making poor behaviors, poor decisions. And what I want you to see is a leader. And again, a leader is not just somebody that has people that reports to them. You lead no matter what you do in the workplace because your behavior impacts other people, spoken and unspoken. People are watching. You're a part of a social norm, a collective family in your company. People are watching you. They are picking up on your behavior. But your behavior, and I really want you guys to understand this, and who you are and how you think does not determine your value and your self-worth. That's where we've kind of gotten mixed up in the corporate world. We literally think, well, logic, left brain, all that we know is of value in the workplace. And yes, that does have value. But sometimes value shows up in what we don't know and in how we treat other human beings. And so we're really getting you a deep dive into understanding who you are. And that same process of defining your components of being human and your basic needs applies to everybody. And then as you look at some of the other tools that we talked about in here, it's natural to have some negative thoughts. It's totally human. That negativity bias in this lesson, we talked about those cognitive distortions. That's just simply a tool for you to wake up and remind yourself and help remind each other. Hey, Susan, it sounds like you might be on the downward spiral and you're kind of thinking some negative thoughts. Let's just kind of pattern interrupt here. Let's stop for a second. And before we keep going with your performance review or your project analysis or whatever it is, let's kind of just take a deep breath and come back to the needs that we all have. Make sure we all have those met before we continue to go. So you're using these tools to help empower people and free them, not to judge them, not to ostracize or exclude them. And it's actually natural. There's going to come a point for you and for anyone else in your workplace where we just get stuck. So you can go back to these tools also in moments where you are stuck. So I call it stuckness with my clients. So when you get stuck, you might want to remember or remind one of your coworkers, hey, Bob, sounds like you're stuck. Remember in chapter 1, there was a module on that. You might want to go back and revisit that lesson. So you're going to use this all the time. It's going to be, some things are going to stick pretty quickly. You're also going to be able to go back and refer to some of the content. That's why it's on video. That's why it's digital. It's on an app. It's on your desktop. You've got 24/7 access to it. So you are not left without a lifeline to know how thinking works and what thinking does and what it can really do for you in the workplace. And then that ladder of inference that's at the end of this chapter, this one's probably one of the most important out of the entire course, the entire book. Please, please, please go and watch that lesson. It's absolutely important when you talk about that, I call it Jedi training. Tiffany Jana came up with that acronym on justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. If my 4 components of being human are unique to me and my basic needs are not being met or are being met, it's going to actually impact how I show up, but it's also going to impact how I climb that ladder of inference. And I'm going to climb the ladder differently than you are, than anyone else is. So your real work here as a leader and as a team member is to remember that person's just climbing the ladder with the belief systems and everything in place that they were given and raised with. And that doesn't mean that they're right or wrong. It just means that's how they make meaning. And if you want somebody to look at something differently or hold the same belief or look at something the same way that you do, the first most important question as a leader is, hey, how are you perceiving what's going on? What data are you seeing? What matters here on this project to you? Can you share with me what your perspective is before this part of your brain goes offline, you make an assumption, and then you jump in, and in the absence of information, you start writing stories and filling in the blanks for somebody else, but you're doing it with what you know and how you think, not how they think and what they know. So the most important part about this chapter as a leader is for you to stay awake and stay aware of this whole process of thinking, the components of being human, and know when you do this deep work, you actually do create an environment that allows for diversity, that creates equity, that is very inclusive because you're able to allow everyone to come to the table, see their perspective. All of life is neutral. we're the ones that show up and create all the multifaceted components. That's what management and leadership is all about. Learning how to manage that process in yourself, and then offering the skills and tools and the compassion to allow other people to learn it and remember they're doing it just like you are. So I'm excited about this chapter. As you can tell, I love this content. This is life-changing, game-changing, global-changing, company-changing work if you stay the course and you do it. So we're going to be moving into the next chapter. You'll see me come back for chapter 3, where we get all into emotions. And yes, you can talk about emotions in the workplace. I'll see you there.